Hello all, here today with something a little different. In the Tier 7 tech tree, German battleship, the Gneisenau. This is of course the Scharnhorst or Gneisenau class battle cruiser, battleship, depending on who you talk to. In the tech tree, so this is a fictional refit that was somewhat planned but never carried out in real life, but exists here in World of Warships, with the actual historical fit of the ship existing as the premium, the Scharnhorst, which is a bit of a pity, but it is what it is. So Tier 7 battleship, so that means she has 25mm plate. We're on the updated estuary, and by updated, I just mean the lighting engine's been updated somewhat. So it's a bit brighter than it used to be. As I adjust my own lighting, sorry about that if that was on recording. Anyhow, 25mm extremity, but she is a German battleship, and that means that her midsection is covered in thick plate, between 40 to 50, and she has armoured strakes beside, or leading up to her 25mm bow, which allow you to bounce shells if you're paying attention. Now she has an ABX layout, 2 turrets forward, 1 turret to the rear. They're twin 15-inch turrets, so twin 380mm turrets, same as those found on the Bismarck. So they have a 20-second reload and the same AP alpha. Now I am bottom tier, so I do have to play a bit carefully. I'm a bit more like a large cruiser than a true battleship in this kind of matchmaking, and hopefully we'll make it work. Gneisenau is a bit of a controversial ship in the community. Some people enjoy her, some dislike her. I'm in the camp of the former. I think she's great fun, which is why I do have her perma camoed, as you can see here in this footage. Bouncing that Alaska shell. Doesn't look like I quite managed to bounce it, took some overpen damage. Her rate of fire suggests that there might be a Edinburgh in the area. Gonna turn away. Edinburgh does pop up, in fact. Now 380mm rifles are fairly good caliber, but the main problem is she only has 6 rifles mounted in the 3 turrets. Bliska pops up, Blisk CDD, shoot DD. 5k off onto the Edinburgh. Kitakaze engages the Bliska that's engaging me. Probably not a great idea, my friend. Trying to edge past this while being able to squeeze up my turrets, but doesn't look like I'll be able to do that. So, if the choice is between getting all 3 turrets off and making the actual turn, I'm going to choose to make the turn. I'm going to empty my back rifle into the Bliska, which dies anyway, just to ensure the kill. Anyhow, you can see the turrets turn quite responsively. Detection is actually pretty good, but I don't have concealment expert. I'm running a 12-point captain, and I prioritized fire prevention first. But anyway, as I was mentioning, the caliber is good, but the weakness is in the number of raw barrels. You see here something like a Sinop, another tier 7 battleship. He has 9 rifles of an even larger caliber. So he outmatches me in raw alpha damage and damage over time by quite a bit, just due to having more barrels. It looks like that Kitakaze caught him with a reload booster though, so he's not going to be outmatching anything in terms of DPS because he's going to be dead as I clean up the kill with a penetrating hit. Now the range is pretty good. 19.5 is not bad, not fantastic of course, not the Nagado's 22. But for tier 7, it's not bad at all. The Germans have always had pretty decent range outside of the FDG and GK, which have a unusually short range for some reason, even though the Bismarck, I believe, is something like 21, 22. It's kind of odd in that respect, but game balance, right? Now she's well armored, she's also exceptionally quick. Unlike her sister Scharnhorst, she does a refit speed, so she has 32 knots of speed, which makes her the fastest battleship at tier 7. And were it not for the existence of the Iowa and some anomalies, such as the speed boosted Alsace and Jean Bar, and the speed boosted Georgia. You can see me there firing 4 shells at the Edinburgh, which is basically broadside but only hitting 1 because of dispersion. She would be one of the faster battleships, but because of all these speed boost ships and the existence of the Iowa class at tier 9, she is only close to the fastest rather than the fastest. Lexington launching torpedo bombers. Maybe they come near me, maybe they don't. Nevertheless, not interested. I'm gonna shoot shells into the side of my higher tier sister, FDG. Now her AA is actually quite impressive, especially for the tier. She has refit secondaries, and by refit secondaries what I mean is she has the 128s that you find on the GK and FDG as I duck behind cover in order to avoid the torpedoes. Hopefully I ducked properly. He might still hit my tail because of my exceptionally long form. My fighter intercepts 3 planes. I intercept 3 with my hull with my AA. As I mentioned, they're the modernized 128s, dual purpose secondaries and AA mounts, which means that unlike most German ships with 5.2 kilometers of long range AA, like the GK, the Gneisenau has 6 kilometer long range AA, and it's actually quite powerful. Now these secondaries also have pretty good base pen, 128mm of course. And then with German quarter pen, this means that with IFHE they pen 32mm of plate, which means even when you're not top tier, if you take IFHE, your secondaries pen stuff. Ooh, shattering my shells onto that. Let's see how many. Okay, so I was gonna see how many rockets I resist, but I'm not gonna resist any because, as you saw there, in the low number of projectiles, the Lexington is running to Tiny Tims with 68mm of penetration, which I cannot defeat. Lock my turrets. Unfortunately, I'm not able to dodge, so there he gets a nice big hit on me. But as I was, oh, sorry, turned off that. As I was mentioning, the long but armored shape lends itself to having decent gun angles, decent gun angles and high speed, but it does mean she is a bit clumsy. Just exceptionally long and thin, a knife gliding through the water. Now the main gun firepower isn't bad as I hit the FDG for another 7.6k if you can get it to bear. But of course the problem is getting it to bear. You have to be very patient. With only 6 Bismarck rifles and Bismarck dispersion, it means you take time to deal damage. 8 minutes have passed in this match. No cruisers have lined up in front of me, so I've been kind of isolated on this flank that we won. Vladdy coming up. Let's see if we can't get some citadels. He's pretty broadside to me. Now the secondaries, if you spec for them, are pretty good. They're the 128s, as I was mentioning. They have good pen. But the problem is, as a tier 7, she has low base range. I believe I'm running secondary module, and even with that secondary module, I only have 5.6 kilometers of range. I believe the base range is 4.5. Finally scored a nice citadel there into that broadside Vladivostok, so she does have some punching power, quite a bit more than her half-sister Scharnhorst, because of the higher caliber. But in exchange she has an inferior Sigma, only 1.8 as opposed to Scharnhorst 2.0. And of course 6 rifles versus 9, and then she has 6 second reload, whereas the Scharnhorst has the 20-second reload. Like the Scharnhorst, she carries torpedoes, and this, coupled with her thick armor for her tier, means that she is a bit of a brawling specialist. Extremely lethal up close, so that's 3 tubes per side. There's a wide and a narrow spread. And if I just go to here, 13,000 alpha, I'm gonna shoot AP into the superstructure, and then deal with the Vladivostok after. I'm gonna hold onto my torpedoes for as long as possible. Not under angled here, so you see him smashing my turret, but not particularly concerned. Don't think the Lexington will connect 2 torpedoes, which means I will have to finish the job myself. That's fine. He dodges, but he's not going to dodge these torpedoes at this range. I can ignore him now. He broke a turret, which is annoying obviously, but I can ignore him. Got close enough to brawl, and we're on to the Jean Bar. At this point, we're under pretty heavy fire. We're just shoving our armored tier 7's large cruiser, shall we say, into the enemy. Now, I still do have a 25mm bow, thanks to being a tier 7. Otherwise, my armor would be able to resist most of this, so you see that one shell that clips me there, and the nose does hit me quite hard. Gonna continue to damage this higher tier Jean Bar as much as possible. You can see there the dispersion trolling me a little bit, but I do get a pen, which I'm more than happy enough to take. Turret traverse is actually quite reasonable, but I don't think I have turret traverse on this 12-point captain. Not sure, I'll have to check that. So I take some pens to my superstructure, like most German battleships. Quite a bit of an extensive superstructure. Colorado is quite close now and nice and broadside, so who can say no to that kind of target? Same goes for Lexington over here. One Citadel on the Colorado. My team is rolling over them, so I don't mind just shoving myself in. I'm almost assuredly going to be attacked. There's a destroyer harassing me from the smoke, but I can't do anything about that. At 6 kilometers, my AA is ready. I'm gonna attack the Colorado first because he can actually shoot me back, and he has the capability of inflicting much more damage to me than the Lexington potentially. Probably aimed a bit high on the Lexington, kind of ignoring the Lexington planes, don't want to divert myself. One Citadel onto the Lexington, maneuver in this manner to short a torpedo. We'll take one. Damage controlling just because I don't want to slow down. This time the front guns will finish off the Colorado, hopefully. Nope, dispersion says nope, 2 overpens rather than any pens. Now, I have lost a front gun, so now I'm a glorified, not even Grashbe, because I have 4 guns, not 6. High explosive dive bombers hit me pretty damn hard, lots of superstructure, but we do clean up the game before I can die. And you can see me taking this large, quote-unquote, super cruiser in this matchmaking across the map in a bottom tier game to victory. 102,000 damage, 44 shell hits, 1 torpedo hit, 18 planes shot down. This AA, as I mentioned, is lethal for a tier 7. 1 in cap, 3 ships destroyed, 1 flooding, 3 SID hits, 11 secondary hits, 2 spotting ribbons, and 5 planes shot down by fighter. Team score wise, nice, generous 2,000 base experience in the Gneisenau. A lot of battleship damage here, but I don't mind too much. And, as I mentioned, pretty lethal AA. Just going to quickly flick on my naval battles, because I forgot to do that. And while we're at it, can turn on... Oh, it was already on, I think. Well, let's just double check. Okay, it's on. Well, looks like we only have to beat 1400. We got 2000 that time, so nothing to write home about, but good enough. So consumable wise, she has damage control, heal, and then fighter or spotter plane. Because she only has 6 rifles, I don't opt for spotter plane. Secondary armaments, so if I had main armaments there, maybe I wouldn't have lost it, but I'm taking secondary armament. Then Damcon in slot 2, and I'm taking AA, interesting. Interesting. I feel like flak isn't really what you're going for. I want a better mix of armaments. I think that might have been an earlier experiment. Fine, and then in the last slot, damage control. There is an option, something to say about taking reduced rudder shift because you do a lot of close-in maneuvering. But I prefer just the straight-up damage control. Now, as I mentioned in the AA, these are the 128s, so these are the dual-purpose 128 mounts on the side here. So short range wise, that's not the 128s of course, but 196, 109, and then a very respectable 168. I did cut the flak bus from 8 down to 6 just now, but overall you can see for a tier 7 battleship, this is very respectable. As for my captain, okay, so I am taking turret traverse, but just a very basic 12-point build. So as priority target for torpedo spotting, into expert marksman, into survivability, into fire prevention, back into adrenaline rush. Next 4-pointer, I have lots of options on where to go from here, because I can spec for secondaries or spec for AA. So I could go basics fire training, AFT, or I could go not. Okay, I only have 7 or 8 points, 7 points left to work with, so I can go exactly 3.4 pointer. Could also go Concealment Expert Superintendent, which is a conservative build, but I think if you're gonna go any kind of secondary builds, you should just skip out on Superintendent. You're gonna grind, but you're not gonna grind that hard, hopefully. And Basics Fire Training also improves that already excellent AA. There's also something to be said about taking some utility skills, such as Jack of all trades and an extra fighter, but yeah, if I was gonna continue going secondary, I can't take manual secondaries anymore unless I want to sacrifice range, but the range is already pretty short. But for a hybrid build, Basics Fire Training plus manual secondaries would be interesting, but maybe AFT might just be straight better in that case. Anyhow, we were bottom tier that match, so let's try and get into a top tier match. Or actually, it might be more educational if I take the Scharnhorst into a match, her half-sister. Well, in the context of this game, her half-sister. I'm using my 19-point GK build here. So, captain-wise, just a standard tank build. Module-wise, pretty similar, but this time because I'm using the tank build, none of that secondary battery nonsense. Aiming systems for the 11-inch or 283mm rifles. And of course main armaments because I'm not spec'ing into secondaries. And then you saw here, of course, I'm taking rudder shift for a little bit of extra brawl power. So gonna move forward with this Scharnhorst, see if we can't get the job done. Weekend degeneracy. Not sure I approve. Oh, nice. We got into a match without too much delay. Perfect. And what does Matchmaker have in store for us? Let's see. Okay, so tier 5 to 7, so I'm top tier. Carrier game. We're against a Ranger, we have an Arc Royal. Opponent-wise, we have a Sinop, King George, Bayern, Iron Duke, Koenig. Don't care about anyone really except KGB and Sinop. Sinop, because he overmatches my bow. Now Bayern also overmatches my bow. But, well, he's a Bayern. He has less rifles, he doesn't have the same kind of dispersion as the Russian, so I don't really care as much. And then King George, obviously, because he can burn me to death. Loading up, we're on the map Trident, and it's a standard battle this time. Now I'm in the Scharnhorst, the premium half-sister. As you can see, the hit points are fairly similar, but if I look at the secondary arrangement here, it's the it hasn't been modernized. So here we have a 150mm rifle, a 6-inch rifle, and then a whole bunch of the 105mm AA guns. So you have a mixed secondary armament, or secondary battery of 105s and 150s. And if you go to AA, you can see that they have the standard German 5.2 kilometer AA range, and the AA is just much less impressive. The same torpedo tubes, 3 per side, wide and narrow spread, same damage, same range of 6 kilometers for close in performance, and the same consumable setup. This fighter plane could be a spotter if I wanted, but in this case I'm glad to have the fighter to deal with the Ranger. AA is not fantastic, so even a tier 6 can attack you. The primary difference is of course the main battery. So again, you have the ABX setup, but instead of having 380mm rifles, 6 rifles and 3 turrets, we have 9 283mm rifles, so that's 11-inch rifles. Again in 3 turrets, but 9 barrels. They have a 20-second reload. AP alpha of 7600 means it's fairly low, lower in fact than the Grausch base, but these are the long-barreled variant of the German 11-inch rifle, so they have higher shell velocity and less shell drag. I'm gonna send my shell sailing across. You can see that German dispersion causing me to straddle, even with 2.0 sigma. With German dispersion, you tend to straddle a lot as my client freezes up for a little bit. Shells are nice and fast, but also light. But against a tier 5 cruiser, which is essentially unarmored, like the Emile Bertin, all I have to do is touch him and I'll get some shell hits. Now the low caliber does have some limitations, unlike the Gneisenau's 380mm overmatch. Well, you clearly don't have 380mm overmatch. So instead you have to truck it out with 283s. Now the 283s are pretty good against cruisers, especially when you're top tier like I am here. But against your peers, your battleships, even this tier 5 Iron Duke for example, I can't really penetrate his belt at this range, whereas I could easily penetrate his belt with the Gneisenau's 380s. So instead I'm aiming for the upper casemate. Looks like I under-led though because of the long distance. You can see there's a fair bit of shell drag with distance. Straddling in spite of my greater number of rifles. However, thanks to the 20-second reload, missing shots isn't quite as punishing. You can also see the excellent turret traverse. Look at that response time. You just drag them across the screen. I know there's a bit of frame stutter, but they follow fairly easily. 5k punch, but pen damage only. Not expecting to get any citadels at all. Even at 16 kilometers like this, I fully expect that Iron Duke to shatter my shells if I hit his belt. Concealment this time you can see is quite good. 13.7. So, okay, I guess I wouldn't say it's quite good, but it's decent. Not fantastic, but definitely not horrible. Good enough for you to get into range and do your job. Now the HE, we don't speak about German battleship HE because we try not to use it unless we have to. But it exists. It does 3200 alpha, 20-second reload, and the fire chance is pretty low. I think it's like 23 or something. Now you do have 9 rifles on a 20-second reload, so it's not that bad, but the 3200 alpha means that you're hitting for just shy of 1000 per shell that you connect, which is pretty pathetic. Now in the past, you would have been able to use your AP against destroyers, but thanks to the AP or just AP versus destroyers change, as I shoot at this ranger on the edge of my range, because you only get overpen damage now on calibers greater than, shit, I don't know what the threshold is. Something around 8-inch guns. Anyway, the Scharnhorst exceeds the threshold, so your AP can no longer get full pens onto destroyers. So the Scharnhorst used to be fairly good against destroyers because of her relatively low caliber, high-ish sigma, and high rate of fire, so you could just fire AP at everything. But this is no longer the case, unfortunately, so she's lost quite a bit of her power against lighter targets, like destroyers. Looks like he's turning. I mean, as long as my Gneisenau spots him by charging headlong into 4 enemies, I'm more than down to take free pot shots at this ranger. Oh, he's gonna turn broadside for me maybe? So if you're tracking my shots or salvos, I've been firing quite extensively, but usually even in spite of the 9-gun salvo and the 2.0 sigma, I only land a couple shells per salvo. This time I land 2. One of them is a citadel, of course, which makes it a bit less painful, but the shells still spray. He's turning away, and of course when you 1 versus 4, well, even if you are top tier and very tanky, it tends to have some bad results. Now KGV, at 13 kilometers broadside, you'd think you could citadel him, and with most battleships, including the Gneisenau, you could, but the KGV actually has an exceptionally thick belt, and my 11-inch shells don't have that much penetration power. So I'm just gonna aim for upper casemate and try to get some consistent pens. He's still firing high explosive, using this island behind me to cover me from these 2 battleships, for the most part. This Sinop is cresting now though. Gonna aim lower, so this time these shells, if they contact, will contact belt. But 2 of them do shatter as they contact belt, as you see. So at this range, just using my short reload and consistent penetration. I wish my allies would stop suiciding into the enemy, but it's kind of hard to ask that. Pretty good salvo there, but 6 overpens, a bit too high. Liska pops up. CDD, shoot DD. The rule is always applicable, and when you have 20-second reload, you really should CDD, shoot DD. turns out, so I missed most of my salvo sadly. Switching to high explosive just for this one salvo, but otherwise I'm going to switch back after this. Because there's so many broadside battleships close by to me. And as I mentioned, even though I can't punish them by getting citadels as the KGB chunks me, I still can deliver relatively consistent pen damage. Even if it's only 5k, 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 if it's 5k every salvo, I'll be more than glad to take it since my salvos come fast and frequent. Trying to bounce what shells I can from the Sinop off my armored rear. 8k onto the KGB this time. More high explosive for me, but I'm getting fairly saturated and at fire prevention. But of course, I still do have 25mm plate that he overmatches easily with his 406s. Nice tight shell groupings, landing 4 shells, a lot of overpens as I rake through the superstructure, but that's the nature of German dispersion. He relights, oh, he doesn't relight any fires, he's just trying to break all my modules, fine. Can't stop you from doing that. Looks like he's going to take some deep waters. He's angled now, so I'm going to aim at the superstructure. If my opponents were less durable, I might try to turn around, but I need time to heal. I'm at just about half health now. And while that's great for my adrenaline rush, it's not great for my prospects of going deep into the game. It's a pretty close match, and half my team, well, what was half my team, went up north. And we're getting pushed quite quickly into our base. Lost my Gajamada, who foolishly open watered against what seems to have been an Iron Duke. I'm healing, he broke my torpedo tube on this side forever. Torpedo tubes on deck are, of course, quite fragile. You can see here, if I was a Gneisenau, I wouldn't have any trouble punching this guy in the face, but as a Scharnhorst, I unfortunately have to shove AP into his superstructure, just avoiding using high explosive. A lot of ricochets. He's perfectly angled in now, and thanks to my German dispersion. It's not the easiest in the world. My A is also pretty beat up from having to deal with sustained fire from the King George V. He's almost at the apex, so I'm going to damage control now, expecting to take fires from both him and KGB. He hits me for 8,000 damage. Not exactly my cup of tea, but sometimes you don't get to decide these things. Now we have a completely bow-in Sinop, which again we can't punish because we're not Gneisenau now. However, does not seem to be looking at us. Now remember, my tube on this side that's facing him currently is broken, but I'm going to take this time to try and turn in, switch to high explosive just to do a bit of taxing damage. Molotov on the edge. Oh, never mind. Oh, we switched to high explosive, fortunately. The Molotov does dispatch my New Mexico. 2k against the Bliska is good. Now I'm angling, not quite giving him my full bow as I would in a tier 8. But just showing just enough side to try and get him to bait shells into my belt. A pathetic 320 damage. Some kind of weird HE overpen. I'm just spamming heal on cooldown at this point. He's firing AP, of course. Gonna try and bounce shells off my armor, and I do manage to get him to overpen only for the most part. I don't quite have the shell alpha to kill him. Oh, Bliska pops up. Interesting. He's inside my torpedo range, but I'm trying my best to survive. He's gonna turn at the last second. I want to see if he turns into me or what. Alright, getting nervous. Not sure if I'm gonna survive, so I'm gonna fire those off. Now do note, if I loaded armor piercing a salvo ago, I would have had a much more lethal armor piercing salvo to send into this guy. About at 100,000 damage, looks like we are gonna go down. Didn't quite connect all 3 torpedoes, but I chose the wrong ammunition. Used a bit too much of my high explosive, 1 salvo too much. Should have accounted for the fact that I was closing, but at this point my team is gonna lose. However, You could see there some of the limitations and advantages of the Scharnhorst. Similar damage this game in spite of the loss, but this is a top tier game. Not that I did that much to any of the thinly armored cruisers because they didn't come very near me. Mostly battleship damage, frankly. My team made the incorrect move of pushing into the enemy base, and so as a result we got more or less slaughtered. Now their team did kind of the same, but their team did it without losing as many members, because my team was just more or less less organized. Got to show off a bit of the brawling. I was quite tanky. The Synop, if he aimed a little better, could have punished me more significantly, but we're not necessarily here to talk about just the enemy's mistakes. And there's also the fact that I was angling sufficiently in order to get those bounces with my armored strakes. AA less impressive, but I didn't get attacked nearly as much. Secondaries also didn't do too much. Torpedoes did their job, but as you saw there, not having overmatch at tier 7, which is an overmatch tier where a lot of ships just punch each other in the face by overmatching through the bow, is a bit of an interesting conundrum, let's just say. So, 104,000 damage, 79 target hits. Of course, of these, we got a whole bunch of shatters and ricochets thanks to the lower caliber and penetration. Compared to the Knives, 2 torpedo hits, 6 planes interdicted by hull, 3 by fighter, 2 incaps, 2 fires, 1 flood, 1 citadel, 1 defender ribbon, and 16 secondary hits. Team score-wise, close to the top, but not quite, superseded by the Atlanta, which pushed into the enemy base. Then damage-wise, even though I fired a third of my HE shells compared to AP shells, I did 4.5k with 20 shells, so if that was 60 shells, then I guess I would have done just about 4.5 by 3, so 13,000, so it's not even close. You can see here the AP damage is much more significant. And as I mentioned, mostly battleship damage. We did try to get some good hits onto the Emil Bertin, but German dispersion is German dispersion, and German dispersion said no, so no such luck there. So yeah, Scharnhorst feels a bit power crept. Honestly, these days I prefer her tech tree sister. If you want to compare AA, short range is similar, 137, but the mid range is vastly inferior, 39 compared to the Gneisenau's 100 something. And then long range is a little less as well, 154 versus 167 if I'm remembering correctly. Now armor is the big draw to most of the German battleships. So Gneisenau and Scharnhorst share a similar armor scheme. Scharnhorst has of course 25mm plate, but do note that it has a bit of an icebreaker uniform 70mm fore-end belt, so if people trying to shoot you in the face, as people do, aim too low, then you can bounce shells off that fore-end belt. Now the main belt is 350, and the upper casemate is 45. Now this offers some advantages and disadvantages. The deck is also 50. So obviously these allow you to bounce high caliber shells, including Musashi shells if they hit you at an angle. However, for many other ships, such as Americans or British, which have 32mm upper casemate, that vulnerable thin 32mm means that sometimes AP shells that sail too high will just over-penetrate and result in overpens. But because of this thicker 45mm upper casemate, you tend to get full pens on the Germans instead of overpens if they just aim into this meaty belt or meaty casemate area. And just like the bow, the fore end is also 25mm, but it has, in this case, a 90mm aft end belt. So you can kind of imagine how tanky this thing is when it's angled bow in charging at you. You can only essentially pen this as an enemy battleship, and then this 50mm section, this 45mm section, this belt, this 70mm section, all of this can bounce shells. Flick back over to the Knives now, and then you'll note a very similar armor scheme. Again, 25, 70, 50, 45, 350, the same 90mm rear belt, 25, and such. So there you have it, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Scharnhorst is pretty beloved premium, and honestly quite fun. bit slower than her sister, of course, as I mentioned. And it used to be that her armament made her superior. Her anti-cruiser guns were a bit more flexible, and the lack of penetration was more than made up by her anti-destroyer capabilities and just higher munitions density and sigma. But these days, I feel like the extra penetration power and overmatch is much more important, and that dual-purpose nature of the improved secondaries of the modernized Gneisenau just makes her much more comfy in the modern meta, in my opinion. So, sadly, the Scharnhorst, while still being extremely fun, does feel a bit power crept. So that was my, I guess, review of the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau paired together for patch 0.8.10, and I hope you enjoyed. Cheers!